Hi, and welcome to the Mid-Level Exceptional Sport Business Podcast. I am your host, Joe Easy, and I am fortunate to be joined here today by Dr. Jim Kadlecek, excuse me. Jim, thank you for joining me here this afternoon.
Hey, thanks for having me, Joe. Really excited to speak with you.
Absolutely. Well, I tend to like to give folks here a chance to tell their own story. I don't like to spend a ton of time telling other people's stories for them. You can probably do that better than anybody else. So can you give us a little bit of background and information on your career journey and your path to where you are today?
You bet. And I guess I'd start by saying where I am today, I never anticipated taking the journey that I did. Kind of dabbled in a bunch of different things. I was a college women's soccer coach. I spent time as a college athletic administrator, a high school administrator, spent some time working in a joint venture with the Broncos in the Denver area, and ended up ultimately going back and getting my doctorate so that I could teach sport business and prepare people to work in this great industry that we're a part of. So I did that at the University of Northern Colorado, was hired, and went to the University of Mount Union, where I taught for about 24 years. And then about a year ago, I left and to go to work for Clear. They had started a new sports and entertainment vertical, and I was a part of that team. And then they made some internal changes, reorganized, and in the process, my position was eliminated. And so I've been doing some consulting work since then, and that's kind of up to date.
You definitely had a journey. And I probably should have done a little bit more of an introduction here for you as well, but we met through your time at Mount Union, right, when you started and led the Mount Union Sports Sales Workshop, where you've impacted literally countless professionals in the industry, help people get their start in the industry. But you've done a lot more than just Mount Union. Your willingness to try new things, explore new opportunities, really sets you apart from a lot of where do you think you get that willingness from?
I appreciate you saying that, Joe. I guess I'll start by a couple of things that were foundational to me when I went to Mount Union. I definitely wanted to go someplace where you could really engage with students, and where in the classroom it would be a very real world approach. I wanted to be dialed in with the industry. I didn't want students after they graduated to say, oh my goodness, that guy that we had was a buffoon. He has no idea what's really going on in the industry. I wanted to bring the industry into the classroom as much as I could. So I was constantly looking at ways of how we could do that in an innovative and creative and also meaningful way for both the students as well as our industry partners. And early on in my time at Mount, Joe, as you well know, probably the best portal of entry into professional sports is through sales. And we had nothing in our curriculum with sales. And I was at an event where Andy Dolich at the time was the president of the Memphis Grizzlies. And it was a whole bunch of people like myself, a bunch of college sport marketing and sport business professors. And he just called us out. He said he had gone through and looked at a whole bunch of different college catalogs with sport management or sport business or sport administration programs, and none of them had anything with sales. And at the same time, I was seeing that some of my students, as they were graduating, were getting jobs in sales. So I had struck up a relationship with Charlie Chislagi, one of the premier sales trainers in our industry. And from that evolved this idea of a one-day sports sales workshop where students could go and get a day's worth of sales training. And then that led into adding another piece to it of a recruiting element where students could have pre-scheduled 15-minute interviews. But I guess to answer, that was a long-winded answer to say, I think that I've just kind of approached things where looking at where is there a need and then finding a solution on how we might be able to help. And that's why even my role at Clear, I really enjoyed, because I was involved with the Clear Health Pass, which was a mobile app to help get fans back into venues. So again, there was a need for people to be able to prove their health status to get in, and the Clear Health Pass mobile app was a great way of doing that. So that's kind of been, seeing a need and then looking for how can we solve for it.
It's a very straightforward way of answering it, but it's a lot easier said than done, right? Being able to take that step back and look at everything in front of you, identify opportunities. And I mean, this is a sales process to a degree, right? But being able to match where you can help and looking for opportunities on a neutral approach.
Sure, but I think that, in the role that you're at, you're a master of doing this because you've got a staff who has different needs. They need different types of mentorship or training or just help on a call or the process. And so you look at ways that you can provide that for them because you see that there's a need there. And so I don't really see, with the things that I did, a whole lot different from a standpoint of we both are in positions where we look at where there are opportunities, where there are needs, and how we can help solve for them.
So is that the advice you typically give to whether it's students or folks who you have known coming through the workshop or have taught as they start their careers? Or are there other things that you encourage them to hold to as they're getting their start in the industry?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I guess a big part of the advice that I have when I talk to students is don't get hung up on the logo. Get hung up on who are you going to be working for? Are you going to go to an organization that's committed to preparing you for next? And so, because you and I both know from our time around this industry, there's a lot of major league teams that don't do things in a very good way, and so it can really sour a young person when they go someplace, they get bad training or they have bad management, bad leadership, and they end up completely abandoning the industry. And so that's where I guess my first piece of advice for anybody when they're going to look for a position is what's the culture from a standpoint of how committed are they to helping me get to my next spot in my journey? And a big part of how an individual can do that for themselves is along the lines of what we're already talking about. And that is when you're there in your job, obviously, number one, you've got to perform your job really well. How many times have you and I heard people interviewing for sales positions say, well, I really want to do marketing, but I've heard sales is a good way to get your foot in the door, which I hate that saying. And I'll say to somebody who says, so you're telling me you're going to get hired by a team and they're going to say, gosh, Jim, you're so terrible at sales. We think we want to hire you in marketing. It's not going to happen, So the first thing you've got to do is do your own job really well. But as you're there at that organization, look and see what other things are going on that you can be engaged with. Talk to leadership of other departments. Learn as much as you can about the organization. And then when it's that kind of culture that's committed to helping prepare you for next, you may have an opportunity to offer a solution that maybe someone else hadn't thought about and start growing your career sort of organically within the organization.
Those are great pieces of advice. From your perspective, what does success look like?
I think there's a lot of different ways of how people define it. I guess I think of it from a standpoint is number one, you feel fulfilled in what it is that you're doing, that it's challenging to you, it's interesting to you, it's calling it, maybe it's hard for you, but it allows you to grow and sharpen your skills and use the skill set that you have, and then you deliver in those things. I don't tie it with title or money or job status. I think it's more something that every individual kind of defines more for them, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's about making the most of an opportunity and being and doing it really well.
I think that's a great perspective on what success is. And it's something that, a lot of folks take time to get to, right? You get so focused on one aspect of success, one element, and ultimately you end up sacrificing the things that really matter in the long run.
Yeah, and I think and gosh, Joe, you've been doing this long enough that kind of this fine line, and that is your work does not define who you are. And so just being able to keep that perspective, hey, this is who I am and what I'm about, and I'm going to go and do my job as well as I can, but it doesn't define who I am. So
yeah. Let's revisit Mount Union for a minute. And I would love to get your thoughts. There are a lot of schools, there are a lot of programs, a lot of teams who will put on, sports, sales workshops, hiring events, career fairs, a version of this or another. You walked us through the process of how you and Charlie got this event started. Why do you think it was able to grow so much in really a relatively short period of time?
well, it has to do with people like you who were committed to making it successful. When I started this, my goal was for students to have an opportunity to get a sense of what it was like to work in the industry. So for those people who are tuned in and not familiar with the event itself, it's a day-long workshop. And I was really deliberate in calling it a workshop and not a conference, because to me, workshop implies roll up my sleeves and I really get involved. Conference implies I have the role of a tape recorder. I just sit there and listen to what's being said. And there's a purpose for both. But I wanted students to walk away from the end of that day and have an appreciable sense of what sales was. I know how hard it is for you guys to find good talent. Somebody can come into an interview and say all the right things, but then once they start that process, they clearly are lacking some of the competencies that are needed for them to be successful. So what I think was what made it inviting for people like yourself on the team side was that you got a day's worth of basically people auditioning for their jobs. It was people are put in very small groups. You train them the way that you would train your own staff. And so you get a chance it's very interactive. It's not just sales managers like yourself telling war stories about your career, but you take 1 or 2 minutes to give your background, then you're right into training. And so you see how people respond to training. How do they respond to being in a really uncomfortable situation? Who volunteers when you ask for a volunteer? And that's a great way to be able to see how are these people going to respond if I bring them on to my team. And so I think that the reason for its success and growth was that some of the teams who were, committed early on, like the Trailblazers, would come and then talk with other people. And, it's a tight industry, or maybe even some people from certain teams would move on to a new team, and now their new team is coming. And so I think that combination of being able to really have this hands-on approach to see students in the environment that they would be in your team, how they respond to it. And then when we added the additional element of the 15-minute pre-scheduled interviews, it worked out well, I think, for all of you to be able to get a chance to train, to get a chance to network with your colleagues, and also to have access to talent to bring in to fill your entry-level sales positions.
You're giving a lot of credit to other folks, people in roles like mine at teams across the league. But obviously, you played a huge and pivotal role in building that as well, not just by drawing and attracting the teams and by drawing and attracting other schools and including other schools and instructors to this event, but also by building connections and helping to prepare students the right way, helping students to approach it the right way. I know countless students who are in the industry who came from Mount Union, not just the workshop, but the school, who are now in leadership positions and are on track to be super high leaders in this industry because of the foundation that you set. And I'm sure that a lot of them stayed in contact and continue to rely on you for a lot of different things. How do you avoid spreading yourself too thin with all the people who rely on you and how much you put on your plate?
Gosh, it's never really felt that way. But definitely, and I know you have the same thing with, as you watch people who came in at an entry level position under your leadership, and then you watch them grow their career and maybe move on to another organization and continue to rise up. It's one of the really fulfilling aspects of the job. And one of my favorite parts, I love it when former students will call me up just to give me an update. Hey, I just got promoted, or hey, I'm thinking about this position, or whatever it would be. There's some students that you maintain a really tight relationship through the years. I could mention a few that it's been 20 years since they graduated from Mount Union, and we still have regular contact. There's others that maybe the first couple of years out, and then they kind of find their own path and they establish their new, kind of group and establish mentors within their organization. And that's fantastic. So I think that, I've never felt like I'm just too busy for former students when they reach out. That, like I said, that's kind of one of the highlights of having done what I did for as long as I have. And the other thing too, Joe, that I was thinking about is it's so cool, like with the sales workshop, where, seeing people who came to that, from other schools, and then a few years they got a job there, and then now they're back, they're an inside sales manager, and then now they're a director, and now they're a VP. And it started at that event. So that's really cool to see as well, and love staying in contact with those people who said, hey, I got my start at the Mount Union sales workshop. So
Those testimonials.
Yeah, exactly.
You cannot put a price on them. I do want to touch on one thing you just said, though. I think, when I asked that question, the first words out of your mouth were, it's never really felt that way. And I think that says a lot about just your approach to work, to people, to relationships. So I've always said, like, we make time and we find time for what we value and what's important to us. And if something is not something we value, then finding time for it is going to feel impossible. So I don't know if I can squeeze time in for this or that, but if it's something that's important to us, there's always going to be time for it.
Yeah, really true. And my wife reminds me of that as well. We make time for what's important. And I will say too, when you're a faculty member, talking to former students is a lot more fun than grading. So, hey, I welcome the distraction.
That's fair. Let's take a step back away from Mount Union for a minute and talk about your transition to Clear. That feels like a huge transition from the outside looking in. Did that seem like it was as significant of a change while you were going through it? And how did you manage that uncertainty while you were making that move?
You hear the expression drinking from a fire hose. I said I felt like I was drinking from Niagara Falls. So yes, it was a huge transition. Anytime you go into something, you sort of, what you know what you don't know, but you don't know what you don't know. And that was probably the most challenging part. Just even, before we started, I was talking about Gmail. I've always been a Microsoft platform guy, Outlook. And so just adapting to Gmail, to Slack, what Slack channels do I need to be paying attention to? As a college professor, I had no need to use Salesforce. Now I need to learn how to use Salesforce. And so just some of those onboarding things. And then again, when I started, it was all remote. So you can't just walk over to somebody's desk and say, hey, can you help me out with this thing with Salesforce or whatever? That was really challenging. I mean, I love sales. I love the sales workshop has really been a labor of love. I love watching you guys train. So I feel like from that standpoint, you know, I've had 15 years of being around really good sales trainers and watch all of you in action, so that I felt comfortable. And then I've also taught it for a long time. So I felt comfortable with the sales process, but it was all the other things that go into it. Plus I had to learn the product that I was selling. You know, it was a SaaS product, and then we had different things that were fluctuating. So, and then the other thing is, you know, candidly, being a college faculty member is a pretty comfortable life in terms of, you know, if you teach 12 hours a class a semester, that means, or 16 hours a semester, which would be a bigger load, but that means that I only have 12 hours a semester where I actually am obligated to being somewhere. And then the rest of the time, you know, I may have office hours or some meetings or whatever, but you own your time much more. When I went to work at Clear, I mean, you know, we were grinding. I mean, it was, my wife would sometimes, like the job that you have now, you know, where you're going early in the morning till late in the evening, depending on where you're talking to. And so that was kind of an adjustment for my family to make, that my availability wasn't what it was when I was a college faculty member. I couldn't in the middle of the day just decide, oh, I think it's a nice day today, I'm going to go mow the lawn. You know, so just making all of those adjustments, a lot of things that you just don't really think about when you're making that switch, but totally loved it. And it was a great experience, and I'm looking forward to kind of jumping into my next experience as well.
Well, I mean, being able, and it goes back to what you had said early on, right? Just being able to have that mentality where you're looking at the landscape, looking at the field in front of you, identifying opportunities and where you can best make an impact. You don't have a mindset like that if you're not comfortable with change and you're not excited about change and tackling the next opportunity and tackling change and going through that transition.
Sure. And I mean, Joe, how many times have you said to your young reps just getting in, you got to learn to get comfortable being uncomfortable? And one thing that I would definitely want to emphasize, I work with some phenomenal people at Clear. My senior vice president, Jerome Pickett, had been at the NBA for a long time before he jumped over to Clear. Justin Gurney was my vice president, who I reported directly to. Ash Einbinder and Sam Spector were other business development people who I worked with. They were all phenomenal. And I was the last one in, and they were all great as far as kind of helping me along the way, and also recognizing what you already said. And that was, you know, Sam came from a team. Justin, you know, was at the league and a team, and I'd known him for a long time, met him, you know, through the sales workshop. And Ash had a lot of different kinds of experience. So for them, it was kind of more in their wheelhouse, much more so than, hey, I've been a college faculty member for the last 20 years, but I'm ready to do this. So they were great about helping me along the way. And I think that goes back to what I said earlier in terms of when you're looking for a place to work, the importance of the culture, the people you're going to be working with, and the people that you'll be working for. And I was just really blessed with that.
You have the ability to take your own advice as well. Look at that. All right, last question for you, Dr. K. This is the hot seat question here. If you could wave a magic wand, this is the big promotion that you're going to get. You are now made president of the sport industry. And with that, you get a magic wand. You can wave a magic wand and change any one thing about our industry. What would that be?
Well, I love that question. one thing, I think I'm going to go to, I'm going to touch on this. I feel like COVID, as hard as it was a phenomenal opportunity for teams to recognize, maybe we can do things a little bit differently. I've often used the analogy that sometimes I feel like in particular, inside sales is like med school. A lot of times you hear stories of, residents who are up for 48 or 72 hours straight. And I, for one, would not want a doctor working on me who's been up for 72 hours straight. But the person who's in charge of all the residents say, hey, when I was doing my residency, this is what I had to do. And I had to be up for 72 hours straight, and it served me well. And, you're going to do the same thing. And I feel like sometimes that mentality has trickled down into inside sales, where the inside sales manager says, I had to make 695 calls a day, and I worked from, midnight until 11 p.m. every day and never got to eat, and, only slept for 10 minutes. And it worked for me, and I'm going to have you do the same thing. And I think that what COVID did, and getting people out of the office, having people work from home, allowed the industry to see, what? People can be effective, and they don't have to be in the office at 7 a.m. on a game day and be there until 11 o'clock at night. We can modify their work schedules. We can let them work remote, and they still are getting results. And so I guess my magic wand would be that we would continue to look at how we would continue to look at ways on how we can let our team, on the team side, that our staffs would be able to work in ways where they're just not getting fried by all the hours that they put in. And how often do we hear that? Long hours, low pay. And in these days where, the challenge of hiring people, we've got to look at being as smart and innovative and creative as other industries are with the way we treat our workforce. That was probably a long-winded answer, and I don't even know if I gave an answer, but that's my thought.
Oh, but it's a great one. I mean, teams it's very easy to rely on the logo and how exciting it is and how cool it is to work for a pro sports team. And for a long time, a lot of teams, not us, of course, but a lot of teams have used that as an excuse to not pay or to not provide a good working environment or experience. And the COVID kind of shocks you out of that. So hopefully we continue to push forward. We continue to provide our staff and across the board, across departments, not just inside sales, better working environment, and create great places to work.
Yeah, definitely. And, and I feel like all the way around that COVID probably accelerated the adoption of technology in the sport industry by at least 5 years, whether it's teams who were reluctant to go with digital tickets. Now they're all in, they couldn't say, well, I'm not sure. I mean, they didn't have a choice. Cashless payment at the venues, just a lot of ways that we've gotten more effective, more efficient, more frictionless because COVID kind of forced it on us. Not that I'm wishing for another pandemic, but it did, I think, make us better.
Let's keep that mindset, right? That mindset, to your point, of looking for opportunities, how you can best impact and not being afraid of change.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you again for your time here, Jim. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom, your expertise with all of us and all the listeners. For all of our listeners, thank you for spending your time with us here, whether you're listening in the morning or the afternoon. I appreciate it. If you know somebody who is exceptional like Dr. K is in our industry, then please send them my way. If you'd like to be a guest on this podcast, please let me know. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. Looking forward to future episodes. Please like, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you happen to be listening. Thank you again.
Thanks, Joe.